Today, we're here to take a look at a glimpse into our AR and VR future with our guest, Scott. But as I just noted pre the start, before we do that, we'd like to start off with an introduction from Victor Purden. Victor, welcome. A big happy birthday to you. Lead us off. Talk to us about optimism.
Oh, look, well, it's just such a happy day for me. I started my birthday. We've got the world's first advent calendar for optimists. So, we've got gin bars with advent calendars, and T2 has got a T one. So we've created one for optimists. And so every morning now I finish it off. We've basically got the text right and the visions. But today I shared one of our oldest family recipes for risole. So it's this beautiful herring salad, which we serve at Christmas Eve when we have the 12 cold fish dishes. So optimism, I'm just full of it today. I'm feeling fantastic. And optimism is the underpinning of innovation, and it is the underpinning of what's taking us to this bright future of augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. Yesterday I was part of a group talking about quantum computing and having a look at what's actually happening in quantum computing. It's not just a vision for the future, it's actually happening. So as we know, pessimists can't be innovators. Dyson and his 5,000 models of the vacuum cleaner before he became an instant success, or Edison and his 1,000 inventions, of which only 2 made money. It doesn't matter what company or organization you're in. Innovation, progress requires experimentation, the acceptance that not every experiment works, and success comes through persistence. And you have lured me here on my birthday, both of you, Guy and Scott, with those words utopia, utopian, and optimism. So my opening question to you, Scott, is what makes you optimistic?
Well, I'm fortunate enough to stumble upon the industry of augmented and virtual reality, and it comes on the back of decades of science fiction writers who are always paid to be pessimistic. But what I found, as soon as we got a hold of these tools in the real world, people started to apply them to a utopian type of outcome, being able to enjoy life better, do jobs better, and so on, and connect better. So it sort of taught me that no matter what other scripts or narrations or downhill pessimistic stories people might tell, once we get our hands on the tools as humans, we can take it the other way. So I come from a sports background, very minimal technology. I joked that I went to an agricultural high school, and I back in the 80s, and we studied AI, artificial insemination. But as I exited the sports world and entered the technology world, I found that I could sort of relive another level of passion. And, it used to be when I coached sport, I would see the positive reactions of kids and the parents and fellow adults. But when I share the tools of augmented and virtual reality, the jaw drops, the big smiles, the laughter, this is what I get to share every day. And that just fuels the optimism and the sort of the dare to dream of the utopia even greater. And sort of one of the taglines I throw out often in our business is, in the 60s, we landed man on the moon. But in the 2020s, we're going to be able to land people in so many other places. And it sort of comes back to the sort of complex terminology called ontological design, which basically, of course, means as we design the world, it designs us back. And what are the tools we use to design the world? And augmented and virtual reality is new tools that we can use with the glowing rectangles that are in our pockets, which will possibly move to the glasses on our face like Guy is wearing. This is going to be an amazing change to the world, an amazing positive change, I believe.
So I'm really looking forward to that pair of glasses that says, you met this guy 22 years ago at X. I'm very good with faces, but I don't always remember their names. So that's what I'm really looking forward to in those special glasses that are coming. And I love the fact you come from Tamworth, you know, and you're talking about, you know, the other, just before lockdown, my kids and I went up the Darling River, you know, and just talking to these remote communities that, you know, typically don't get the Governor General visiting or, you know, Obama or the like. And yet, as you say, with augmented reality and virtual reality, we can be anywhere and anyone can be with us. Can you share a little bit of that vision of what a Tamworth in 5 or 10 years looks like with augmented reality and virtual reality?
Yeah, well, town planning takes on another meaning. Sharing presence with somebody takes on another meaning. I guess imagine waking up with your spiritual leader, religious, or your guru, or someone, and having that to start your day instead of having to, you know, read the news that comes by, and it's heavy in text, and you know, the news platforms are often using negativity and dystopia in a way to keep us glued. But we have now a tool with the power to share presence with people that will uplift us on a daily basis and sort of reinterpret places. So some of the early days of augmented and virtual reality was to help counsel veterans after coming back from combat, and VR would be used in a way to reinterpret that moment of you know, injury or disturbance and so on. And so similarly, you know, in city or rural and regional towns, we're going to be able to reinterpret the landscape and repurpose it. And so what's interesting with COVID is that it's sort of brought more attention to the sea change and the migration back to the regions, because if you don't need to be in the city to do your job, then you might as well live in a more human sort of environment with more space and more time with bare grass under your bare feet. And I think with augmented and virtual reality, we're going to be able to do that even more, which means there'll be more people in rural regional townships that have a potential to have greater incomes. And then with that will flow on to other businesses. And so all of a sudden we have this amazing redistribution of population. And I always sort of say, having come from Tamworth to now live in Sydney, I sort of challenge Lucy Turnbull's Greater Sydney model. And I think of mega cities with mega problems. And I think that there's a great power with rural and regional townships being able to flex their muscles creatively, just if they had the right tools to do so. So we could have Wodonga meeting Wall Street in a holographic telepresence if it wanted to. Maybe we don't need to meet Wall Street anymore if we've got this population redistributed. So I think people will tend to have different thinking patterns when they're living on top of each other compared to when they've got the space and they can call upon whoever they want from around the world, like you say, an Obama through to, you know, a historical figure, Nancy Bird Walton, a breakthrough female pioneer. So I think there's just all sorts of amazing new possibilities that allow us to imagine, that give us the license to imagine.
God, you sing to me. I think everyone's smiling who's on screen. So I think you were going to perhaps share a short presentation, just telling us what is augmented reality in 2020, what is virtual reality in 2020, and how you see the future and how will we progress.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll dig in here and share screen. I will treat it like flashcards. So I'll go through it very quick, and if something triggers with you, feel free to pop up and ask me the questions. But
everyone, it's not church here. You can use the chat function, and if you need to interrupt, you know, throw your hand up and Scott will take something from you in between. Go for it, Scott.
Absolutely. So as you can sort of see here, well, I first should explain my company's name, Humence. So speaking of Edison with 1,000 inventions, this name took me 1,000 different names to come up with something I was totally happy with. And Humence is the mashup of immensely human, immensely human. So usually when we think of technology, we think of reducing humanity. But the idea of the design of our platform is to help increase aspects of humanity in that connection. And I'll get to some of the neuroscience of it in a moment. But then when thinking of what's our best way to help people understand the power of this technology, first of all, I came back to the sports market, and I spoke earlier of in the 60s, we landed man on the moon, but still here in 2020, as sports fans, we can't even go on the field. So through 3D reconstructing the players and the ball as they move around, we're going to be able to go on the State of Origin field or the NBA court or the Australian Open tennis court and so on. And here is an example with Barcelona Football Club, which many people aspire to. I was lucky enough to get one of the most inspirational people in technology ever, Steve Wozniak, into our virtual reality headset. Unfortunately, the kids of the day think this is Kyle Sanderlands, which is not as visionary. But anyways, this is what we've got to understand. I'm 47 just the other day, and so I'm from a different generation. And now that perhaps one of the most important generations, the millennials, you know, they're moving away from the traditional sports to esports, and we've got to be sort of conscious of where their head's at, who they know, what's the inspiration points for them. And I'm just going to keep an eye on the chat as well, because I see a few questions might have popped up there.
Don't let yourself get distracted, Scott. We'll distract you if you need to be.
Yeah, please just interrupt me with the questions as they come about. But what's important is that question, why now? And in the next probably 1 to 4 years, we're going to see a billion plus people move towards 5G devices. So if 4G devices brought us streaming 2D video like Netflix, well, 5G differentiator is going to be the streaming full-bodied humans, which will give us those psychological interaction key cues, if we call it that. Of course, COVID's been an instigation, and the growth of esports has been another instigation. But when you look at that stat, 47% of people would pay extra for a product if it was immersive. You then got to think, what are we doing? Keeping our products flat. The world's not flat. So let's acknowledge how we are as human beings and put it into that format that we're most naturally inclined to interact with. Now, this is a stat-heavy page, but just this is the page that sort of might relate to every different sector in a sense. And the top two circle bubbles relate to education, and where a group of C- students with virtual reality were up against A+ students who were just using normal teachers and normal teaching resources. In 4 weeks, learning astrophysics, 15%. That was the difference between C- students and A+. C- beat the A+ students. But then 2 weeks later in the retest, there was a 30% difference. C- students beating A+ students because they had that virtual reality experience. You call it immersive, you call it interactive, but the next level, you call it embodied. It's embodied learning. And then over on the graphic on the right side with the white background, you see 275% more confident learning in this immersive way, 4 times faster than classroom training. It's incredible. If we move to the bottom bubbles, we're then moving into stats that are coming out of enterprise. So 90% reduction in errors. How would we like that in every sector? 30% increase in productivity. And then, of course, a massive cost reduction in learning. So we think of people going through TAFE, or how many of us after COVID, we may need to relearn or learn new skills. And if we could do that 10 times more effectively, let's use those tools. This is how we are reconstructing sports. So this gives a bit of an idea of the workflow. And I can share this deck with everybody later as well. And this picture gives a bit of an idea of how I am stepping around a football field, in this case soccer, using both a mobile but also a VR headset. So sometimes people think, oh, We won't all have VR headsets. So, well, I think that'll change. Like we used to have Encyclopedia Britannica on a parent's guilt trip in the 80s. I think every parent, if they want to feel they're giving their child the best education possible, they're going to be having the guilt trip to have a VR headset in every household because of the infinite possibilities. So not only will we be able to have Obama and whoever else invited to our home, we'll be able to go and visit all places in the world. And in fact, during COVID, I've been flying around the world through Google Earth and virtual reality. I've been doing that every second day. And then, of course, this was the big wake-up call, Pokemon Go in 2016. It was the world's largest entertainment by revenue. But what a lot of people don't know is last year, it actually increased its revenues compared to 2016. So it hasn't gone away. And in fact, this company bought a friend's company where they're basically going to enable them to 3D map the world. So our mapping of the world at the moment is predominantly through Google. But imagine if our mapping of the world is going to be more thorough, more 3D true from people playing games. And people will be incentivized to map different places of the world through these games. And then, of course, recently, the iPhone 12 has come out. And with that, we've got the cameras and the sensors to enable us to map everything outside, but also through to our living room. So it's not what you're looking at that matters, it's what you see and how it can be reinterpreted. And there's, I guess, a fun Christmas gift suggestion with Mario Brothers, where you'll be able to now with your Nintendo have Mario drive around your home in custom-made circuits that you or your children create. So
90% of
here's a comment on toys.
are handled by computers. AWISE is not sure the Macintosh could handle the job.
Would you consider a Macintosh in the future from Apple?
Would I consider one? Maybe if they changed their looks a little bit and it looked a little more like a real computer should. I don't know how a real computer should look, but they just don't look real to me. They look like toys.
The fact is that our products are not toys.
John Scully was a great debater, wasn't he? But that's really interesting how a lot of the best technology now had originated from toys. I just find it incredible. But then another source where this sort of technology was given birth was in 1453, and around the same time as the Gutenberg press. Theatre projectionists used this smoke and mirrors trick. And so they would put an actor below a stage, and then the audience would see this sort of ghostly effect. So hence Pepper's Ghost, and Pepper is the guy who sort of reinvigorated this in 1853. And now, of course, that's been used by politicians through to musicians and so on. But in 1901, the guy that wrote The Wizard of Oz wrote a fairy tale about augmented reality glasses. In 1901, this was predicted. And the idea is with these glasses, when you looked at people down the street, you would see a letter on their forehead: W for wise, F for fool, K for kind, C for cruel. Now, this sort of prompts me to tell a story about a friend of a friend who met Albert Einstein and went to his lab. And as a little girl, about 5 years old, she said, "Mr. Einstein, how do I be as clever as you?" And the answer was, read fairy tales. And then she thought, as a 5-year-old, I'm not happy with that answer. There's got to be more to it. Whilst Mr. Einstein went on to other things. And she said, "Mr. Einstein, how do I be even more cleverer than you?" And that's apparently stumped him for a bit. And his answer was, read even more fairy tales. So don't dismiss toys and don't dismiss fairy tales, even as adults. Super powerful. But one bit of reality is how we've grown as a worldwide population. And this is an incredible, incredible graph. In fact, this graphic is about 2 years old, and you'll see on the left-hand side, the prediction for 8 billion people a few years ago, just a few years ago, was 2028. We're about 7.8 billion now in 2020. We're going to reach that a lot quicker. So how do we manage population and population distribution? I think there's some answer in using augmented and virtual reality. And these graphics also talk to me as well. And when we've got cities like Las Vegas, Tel Aviv, Doha, Dubai in the deserts, look at Australia and all we've got to play with. what could we be doing to start a city from scratch, for example, and using tools like augmented and virtual reality? And on the left side, here's a headline from a few years ago: Sydney is full, yet we're still building. And we've got the warning signs in places like Bangalore in India, where they talk about it being uninhabitable in 5 years' time. And we've got discussion even in UK Parliament about why we're spending £40 billion on a railway network when in 2033, 50% of meetings will happen holographically. So there's some really good teasers of questions. And even this guy won election in India, the world's largest democracy, by using holographic technology, albeit he used the old Pepper's Ghosts rather than the new stuff. And then, of course, we've got the big financial firms predicting huge future for AR and VR, bigger than PC and TV. And then, of course, we think, okay, what's happened now with COVID, with all the planes landed? There was predictions to go from 1 trillion being spent every year on corporate aviation to 2 trillion. And we ask ourselves, why are we spending that much money on aviation? Maybe is there a better way to do it? And these are the sort of a stepping stone. They're clunky, not so fashionable, but that's changing. In this year, we're starting to see more fashionable and smaller form factors of glasses. And I sort of talk about this graphic as the storytelling clock. The best stories were told around the campfires until some guy thought he could scale this and design a theatre, and then a cinema, and then a TV, and so on, until the psychological story sharing factors started to get compromised by smashing the 3D sense of the story to 2D. And then, of course, the stories got scaled, but they became less human in a way. But now with AR, VR, we're coming back more to that 3D authenticity. And speaking of which, as humans, depth, 3D, space, it's a survival tool. But this is a tricky test we had as psychologists. I don't think we do it much anymore, but a mother would shake a teddy bear at the end of some plexiglass. Before 3 months, the baby would scream across that glass and not worry. But at 3 months, it would then think, oh my goodness, there's a danger there, and it wouldn't go across the glass. 3 months later, there is not only depth perception, but depth preference. And when we talk about 2D zoom fatigue and so on, this is part of the reason why. It's the survival tool. And this, of course, they say 90% of presentations that include a picture of a brain are trusted more. So take what you want of that statistic. But the arrows here indicate the 2 ways we process vision. And the bottom arrow indicates object identification. It answers the question what. So that is mostly related to 2D sort of presentations. The top arrow is the dorsal visual processor. It answers the question how and why. And for it to answer the question how and why, the brain needs information on where is A related to B in space and time. So we need these spatial understandings to get the how and the why answered. Otherwise, our brain is just getting the what. And then as humans, of course, our eyes are designed differently to crocodiles, for instance. The prey of the crocodile doesn't want to sort of signal where it's looking, whereas as humans, our eyes are designed this way to communicate to people. Now, if I look directly down the camera, hopefully I'm looking directly at you. And with that, we elicit more neurotransmitters, which elicit the neurochemical oxytocin. And with more oxytocin, we have more trust, loyalty, persuasion, and bonding. So when we meet each other face to face, we're getting more of that oxytocin. But often when we're looking at 2D video, I'm looking here and the camera's there and so on. That's why we miss the release of that drug. That's why also when we're looking at our mobiles, we're getting more dopamine and cortisol, stress-related drugs, than we are getting that oxytocin. So what's also important is how we experience technology in an embodied sense. Now you'll see here in 20 seconds, this guy's getting a rubber hand smashed and he jolted back as though it was his real hand. So after 30 years of living, or 40 or 50 years of living in life, he has interpreted a foreign object as his own. So imagine the power of VR in being able to have these embodied experiences. Now, we don't want people stabbing our hands with forks, of course, but imagine if we're able to get some eye contact and we're able to have hugs and all sorts of things there, and handshakes and so on. So it's really interesting. And what's also really interesting is one of the first experiences with VR in the new wave in the last few years is being able to go to, I guess, unreachable places, like for many people underwater, and have close-up experiences with whales that appear photoreal. And when a lot of school students came back to a Stanford study about a week after experiencing it, 35% said, yes, I have really dived with whales. So it's like an awake dreaming. It's quite an incredible phenomenon. So in how we communicate, you know, body language is so important. So that's why I'm letting my hands come into vision sometimes here. But of course, our voice use, but selection of words is so minimal. Now, this is an arguable split of percentages, but it's roughly there. And what we've got to remember in amongst all the new technology and the way it's been flattened to 2D is it sort of forced people to feel alone together. Now, one reason why I'm optimistic is that we've got AR and VR coming in to displace the 2D communication channels, which will help us feel more together. And one step my company did towards this is back in 2016 with $50 cameras, a real bootstrap job. We put a person in the middle there and we were able to create them. And at first we thought, we'll take some inspiration from Imagine, from John Lennon. And when you look at this picture, I'm sure most of you see John Lennon, but there's only a few squiggles. But we fill in the picture, our brain fills in the picture. In fact, what the neuroscientists tell us, of course, is only 30% of what's really in front of us in the real world comes back and our brain reconstructs things. And that's like when we watch sport, why we jump from one 2D camera to another, it's helping our brain reconstruct as though we're there. And this is the output we made. This is the guy we got standing in the middle. And as you can see, it is very photoreal. And in fact, it goes beyond the picture that Star Wars gave us in the Jedi Council. It was quite phenomenal. And how accurate can it be? Well, with your iPhones now, centimeter accurate, millimeter accurate if you get nice and close. So it's an incredible tool we've got in our pockets that's soon going to come on our faces. And I give that probably the next 2 to 7 years in that range. And of course, the joke I had a couple of years ago when Elon Musk says SpaceX rockets can get us anywhere on Earth in 60 minutes. Well, we say that's lag, that's latency. Let's make it 60 milliseconds with holographic telepresence. And so if we could get man on the moon in the 60s, surely we can do holographic telepresence and be together in that rich oxytocin delivery in the 20s. There you go. So I'm ready for all the questions.
Scott, what an amazing and wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed the ease with which you spoke about the topic and with the great knowledge and insight. Look, sign me up. When do the jobs open for humans on changing careers? I think through this whole COVID thing was a great example of people realizing how much challenge there is and all this fatigue people talk about with this 2D use of the computers. I have this great property behind me. That's literally a property from the top of my hill. And for the last 16 years, I've been there. I used to, on a Friday night when I finished work, get on the quad bike right up the top. The sun had already set in the office and I watched the sun set again, a perception thing. I would love to have been able to share that with people whilst they're in lockdown, whilst they're stuck in their mega cities. Yeah. But Victor, look, it's your birthday today. I'll throw to you for the first question, the privilege of the birthday boy.
All right. Well, Lubosh and I have got a very similar question. So, Scott, imagine next year, second half of the year, you're running the Albury-Wodonga Innovation Summit. And you've got a global audience, you've got a local audience. How will Guy turn it into a virtual reality experience?
Yeah, so a number of ways potentially. So we've got to think of those who will be restricted to mobile and those who may wish to experience it even richer in a VR headset. So in building a bridge, if you imagine a cross section of cities, and the cities are divided by a Grand Canyon, and you can do a cross section. And on this side of the Grand Canyon is the 2D world that we live in at the moment, largely. And on the other side is the 3D AR, VR world. Well, in designing for this and the migration, we've got to build a bridge. So we've got to give people a way to tap into this holographic conference through their mobiles and through the AR or VR headset. So one way is, of course, you might have your panels of 3 to 5 people in one location or many. And for these people, we would want to have a multiple camera setup so we could film them from different angles and reconstruct their being, so to speak. So then everyone in your audience, instead of, you know, we're right now in the Brady Bunch assembly of faces. So in AR, VR, I would be seeing more so people sitting around a campfire, so to speak. And you could resemble the real world with a lecture theatre and a stage and 100 people up in the audience. But if we're in AR, VR and we have this capability to do things a different and better way, why would we have people way up in the back row? Why not have that intimacy and closer feedback loop and invite the whole audience to sit in that circle of the campfire?
It's very visionary. As the kids and I were sitting around a fire on the Darling River, so remote, you know, that there was a little bit of Wi-Fi, but not much. But you just imagine, you know, taking people to a place like that and beaming in one of the world leaders to have a conversation.
100%.
So this leads into a question from Christopher out in the audience. Now, Christopher, I don't think he's got his mic handy. His question was, Scott, your thoughts on VRs and holograms, i.e. no headset. And in asking the question about the future of using holograms, I think of R2-D2 and Princess Leia projected there for everyone to see. That was one of the earliest, I guess, modern visions I saw of that. What's your thoughts on having holograms versus, you know, a headset, no headset?
Yeah, so there's a bit of semantics in the industry. So holograms, I usually reserve that name for Hollywood or for a lab in, there's one in Canberra and one in Tokyo and Kyoto that does like a remote intersection of a particle of light, and that's a real hologram. And everything else to me is holographic. It's hologram-like. So it's a slight nuance, but I feel it's important. So without a headset, you could use your mobile. And of course, the behavior of using a mobile now, there's a billion people every day taking a selfie. So that's nice. And people are doing it for a fair amount of minutes, 3 to 10 minutes, depending on your age group. So there's ways to have those sort of short spurt experiences. But of course, if you're wanting to have that experience, you know, for half an hour, a VR headset is, or AR headset is ideal. And as I said, I'm looking at 2 to 7 years for the headsets to really come in and for the parents to get the Encyclopedia Britannica guilt trip. But then there's one other way. Imagine like a snow globe. Imagine like a dome with 1 meter diameter up to 3 meters diameter. And in that dome, we put a spinning mirror, and it spins so fast and we project into it. And as we project into it, it's like the old CRT TVs. There's a persistence of vision. So we could have mobile free, eyewear free, just look into the magic snow globe spinning mirror trick, and you will have your conference playing out there. So I see that's a potential. And it's all, I like the format of it as well. It's very circular. It's very inclusive. It's almost resembling the circular nature of everyone getting around the campfire again, and not needing the mobile or the eyewear. And then I can also see it not just for business conferences, but I would love to see this sort of thing in pubs and clubs as well. And this is the way people could be watching sport instead of on flat screen TVs up and away, you know.
Excellent. So we've got one of our regulars with us today, Lubosh. Lubosh, I see you've been happily asking questions on the chat. Welcome. Why don't you open your mic and ask one of your great questions?
Yeah, thank you. No, I was just wondering because Scott was talking. It was, as an educator, I have an interest in that part that he mentioned how fast everyone learns with VR. So, do you work with any companies that use it actually in real courses in education, or give us some examples? Because I mean, you gave example of an experiment, but of course this could already be used somewhere.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, probably one of the early major investors and instigators in the education world were Google, who were using 360 video, which I don't believe is quite VR, but it's sort of a good early stepping stone for primary school age children and so on. And they were taking children on field trips. So, I used to teach about 8,000 hours in schools back in another past life of mine, in a sense. And the headache of teachers taking kids off site, and especially now compared to 10, 20 years ago, right? So what Google did to help the education world out all around the world was take special 360 cameras into some very interesting places. And then schools could use, a range of Google Cardboard experiences and be teacher-led around fascinating places that they otherwise would never have had an excursion to. And they could do it collaboratively. In fact, a friend of mine who's now one of the head engineers at Facebook also created an experience where kids could relive landing on the moon. So he recreated this experience so 30 children in a class could live that experience as it happened, with the real audio, with the astronauts 3D modeled. An amazing experience, which of course we talk about the race that stopped the nation. That was the imaginative discovery trip that stopped the world, and now children can relive it. And of course, as they can with a lot of other amazing moments in history. So that's a historical perspective. Of course, that case study I mentioned relates to astrophysics, so what a stretch for early teens. But that is now, an area, physics and chemistry, biology, is being served by dozens and dozens of AR, VR companies. Our company, we've been used lightly in different, education and tourism type aspects at the moment, but we haven't fully yet gone to market. But next year, we expect to have a lot of involvement with education.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Scott, I mean, I think you mentioned traveling around the world using Google Earth. We had DST, which is a part of the defence, who do research, and they brought their equipment and allowed attendees to travel wherever they wanted in the world. Obviously, in general, geographical education, history education, they're amazing opportunities. Other areas, Labosh, where things are really starting to happen that I've been seeing, are in specialised areas like medical training. Instead of having to have cadavers to open up bodies, students are able to get in now and 3D model and look at organs and really learn stuff in a much more interactive way. So there's plenty of amazing things happening in industrial areas, in advanced medical areas, that are allowing 3D modelling and the use of the augmented reality or VR to really learn and shape the way we think. Scott, you talked about the education thing, and I think that's critical. I think of entertainment. We all think of entertainment, games, even virtual travel and telepresence. But education, we had David Broadbent on in one of our earlier sessions, and they're taking learning out into the field with mobile devices where they scan a QR code and it shows them, how to use a pump on a CFA firefighter, or how to use a piece of equipment, and to imagine that they could almost grab this device in a VR world and look around it and, oh, there's the cord to pull to start it. I think I see that's the real potential in education.
It's an absolute democratization into field services and, all sorts of skills that required to manage machinery. And then also, from Edith Cowan in the West to a lot of Melbourne universities, and even I think Federation University in regional Victoria are using computer vision. So whereby sometimes, cameras with the machine behind them can recognize weeds better than the human, and give us an assessment of a property and what's the best strategy to manage it. And so with AI, a common concern with people is, will it take over our jobs and so on? It will replace some, yeah, but it will in a large part help us do our jobs better and more effectively. So it's a fascinating new tool that can be, almost implemented in almost every role in almost every industry.
And I love the reference to fairy tales, but probably as much fantasy, that sci-fi writing. We are limited by our own imagination, because imagine a drone that seems to have a series of cameras that can now go into a space that is risky or unhealthy or dangerous. And all of a sudden, with that drone in there providing this three-dimensional view, a person can now sit in their VR world and actually interact with that space, whether that's for agricultural purposes, whether that's for, safety purposes in terms of firefighting or rescue and recovery. It doesn't matter what it's for. There will be amazing potential where we see this cross section between 5G, robotics, AR, VR, and potentially even AI. I mean, off topic a bit, but there's a thing called FarmBot, and it sits there and scans over your own little plot like a 3D device and grows your plants and feeds them and weeds. So it really is limited only by our imagination at the moment. Do we have any other questions? If we do, it's a town hall. Feel free to open your mic. Liam, I see you've come on. You've got your hand up. Either way.
Hi, Scott. It was an awesome talk. It was really interesting. I kind of was wondering what you think about having like an internet of senses. I read an article from Ericsson a few weeks ago about the internet of senses, where like VR is not just vision, but it also, you're able to feel, taste, smell. Just your thoughts on that kind of area.
Yeah, I love the sensory substitution and sensory addition, and I love to think that the world we live in, has 1 trillion parts on the electromagnetic spectrum, and we only see 10. So we're pretty blind as a species. And if we got all these other ways of sensing the world, we know before the tsunami, many animals sensed the tsunami before we did. And if we can find ways to work with the animal intelligence or artificial intelligence from different sensors and so on, it's an amazing way we can.
Oh, looks like Scott's frozen momentarily there. That's the challenge of the internet and the importance of connectivity. I'm sure he'll be back in a moment. If anyone else does have a question, get yourself ready and turn your video on and give us a wave, and we'll throw over to you.
Okay,
you're back, Scott. We lost you for a moment there. Oh, he's not back again. So I think there's some incredible stuff. And Liam, you raised that incredible point. What about other senses? Like VR, we're so used to seeing the goggles on the head. How powerful is sound, and to hear a sound and it might take you back to a particular moment? How powerful is the sense of smell? I'm currently watching my weight, and I smelled this rich chocolate dessert, and it filled me with this wonderful sense of emotion. So it's, I'm sure there's a lot of work there, and it's a whole new can of worms to look at AR. Scott, we did lose you there for a moment. You're back. You look stable. Take the mic again.
Yeah, good one. So there was a fascinating demo with Vodafone last year with a boxer, or actually, sorry, a rugby player wearing a haptic suit. And remotely, there was another rugby player, but they had a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, and then the 25-year-old professional. And they took turns at tackling this guy remotely through 5G, and this guy wearing a suit that took impact measurements from a dummy padded tackling bag. And of course, he felt it a little with the younger Tucker, and then the 15-year-old a bit more impact, but then by surprise, the 25-year-old prop who came in for the tackling bag blew him away. So we can have some really interesting changes to sport. So for example, on the weekend, Mike Tyson took on another boxer, and before that there was a YouTube star taking on an ex-NBA player, and there was an awful knockout. But what if, instead of boxers, you know, boxing each other physically firsthand and doing tremendous damage with concussion, what if we could have remote 5G boxing, and it would be concussion free? So we could call it 5G concussion boxing. But then I go to more friendlier things, and you know, for all those executives that fly Sydney to Melbourne all the time, or even Wodonga to Wall Street, what you're flying for often is that whites in the eye conversation, that handshake conversation. And we've just had the assumption for decades and decades, you can't replace that. And in some ways you can't, but you could reduce the amount of requirement for it if we could replicate those behavioral cues which lead to trust, loyalty, persuasion, bonding. So
and it looks like we have a great pause there, and so I'll jump back in again. What a great example of the boxing. And I momentarily thought of, you know, these manly men stabbing each other with swords. You're back again, Scott.
Apologies.
We need to get you a quality 5G connection.
Yeah, exactly. I live opposite the Navy, and the Navy must be on a tea break, checking their Instagram.
I was just interjecting and talking about the boxing and saying, I immediately thought of fencing, where people stopped gorging each other with swords and they decided they'd do fencing. So I can envisage what you're saying with boxing. It would take some time for people to come up with a concept and accept it, but yeah. We might just move along. We've got another gentleman in the audience, Eric, that was keen to ask a question. Eric, unmute your mic and over to you.
Unmute. Yeah, some comments to start with. I went to a sort of a VR workshop at Melbourne Uni, must have been 12 months ago. And I know they've started to experiment with like VR in cells. So the student is like a miniature inside a giant cell, and then, you know, you might be looking at the mitochondria, and, you know, you're literally like a microscopic size, and you're looking at it and you think, oh, this is interesting. And then you look around and you see something else in the cell, and you can like jump from where you are to that new part of the cell. And then if you want, you can get it, you know, text descriptions of what's going on and all sorts of stuff. So that's, you know, that's amazing. The other thing is I've spent a bit of time in Google Earth at one stage, because they had a VR headset at the library at the dock in Melbourne City. And I've realized how insanely addictive that is. You know, like there's a mode in Google Earth where you can fly, and then you can up the speed. So yes. I was flying from Paris, following the Seine River as well as I could, and it bends like all over the bloody place. But, you know, literally you could fly from Paris towards Switzerland, you know, or you fly from Rome to the coast and then around to Portugal. And it's just so addictive. And then the really freaky one is when you can do things like they've got a link to the top of Everest, and then you walk the last 50 meters and you're on the summit of Everest. Yep. And you play with your hands and you take it to like sunrise or sunset, and you're just yep. sitting looking across the Himalayas, and it's just insane. And I think one of the things that we really, really need to think about, and I'd like to hear your comments on it, the addictive nature of this sort of stuff. You know, we already hear stories occasionally of, you know, someone in Japan or Korea dying because they've just been playing a game for so long. You know, VR is like 90 times more addictive. How are we going to deal with that?
Yeah, the positive thing, and by the way, great Viking name, Eric Pedersen, very good. I feel confident that the practitioners in AR VR are setting the scene, are setting the DNA for responsibility of design better than the Web 3.0 world. The Web 3.0 world, very Silicon Valley bound. The Web 4.0, AR VR, Industrial Age 4.0 world is seemingly having more responsibility for these kind of things. And, you know, obviously the experiences you can have in VR and so on are more rewarding. But what I feel is that the early practitioners are exhibiting greater responsibility and nudges, you need a break now, for example. And you know, if we think that when using these things, on average, we're pulling them out of our pocket 150 to 200 times a day. That is quite unnatural. And I think if we can work more with the human sense and human behavior, natural human behavior, we can sort of overcome some of these issues that have come out of social medias, which have sort of helped us join the world in a way, but they've also led to issues like addiction and exploitation, meddling in elections and things like that. And this is one of the magic things that, you know, I enjoy with augmented and virtual reality. If we can share space and time with people outside our normal bubbles, outside our cities, outside our culture, outside our countries, we can start to sort of get more of the aspect like looking back to Earth from the moon, and we're all as one, in a sense. We're all on the same team. We're the human race and not all these different races. So I feel having this holographic telepresence can help the world better work together. Well,
I know we're coming up towards the hour, and like the town hall, we're happy for everyone to stick around and continue chatting. But I think that closing statement there, Scott, is a perfect opportunity to wrap up and finish up what we were doing. And that was that we were here talking about a glimpse into our AR and VR future. The reality is it would take many, many hours, and obviously people like Scott are investing lifetimes into making this happen. What I would like to say is a big thank you to all of our sponsors that make this happen. In particular, the Victorian Government and the DIF, or the Digital Innovations Futures, are a key sponsor. I'd also very much like to thank our co-host and Chief Optimist, Victor Purden. A special thanks today because it is Victor's birthday. So thank you again, Victor, very much for joining us on this auspicious day. Would you like to make any closing remarks to the official session?
Oh, look, Scott has inspired me. You know, this is very practical conversation. You know, and yesterday I attended an event on quantum computing, and they sent me, you know, the feedback note, you know, what did you learn? And I actually didn't learn anything. It was so far above me that it was just incomprehensible. Whereas Scott, you are so practical. You are so enchanting. I've just loved it. So a perfect birthday present to me. As I said at the beginning, if I hear the word utopia rather than dystopia, if I hear optimistic, my heart is full. So Scott, thank you. And to you, Craig and Greta and Liam and Eric and Labosh and the other people online, the conversation has been rich. Jan shared some really interesting stuff as well. So thank you. And Guy, it's been such a fabulous festival. I can just imagine next year. I actually reckon we could do something amazing with something virtual.
Well, it is, as I said, our penultimate session. We have one more session next week with Going Digital for Your Business. So it's a practical session around how small businesses might move forwards. We've quietly had Craig Murphy sitting up there in the corner in each of these sessions, and I really appreciate Craig's support in running these online sessions. And we will hopefully be back next year with a hybrid process. And who knows, maybe Huments will move forwards and we can prototype some telepresence where we can have multiple physical locations coming together. So look, I'm on board. You know, we can all be nervous about technology. There's risks in, you know, anything that we do, and it's up to us, society, to shape that. But thanks again very much, Scott. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Anyone who wants to stick around and keep asking questions, please feel free to do so.